Welcome back. This week we're going to talk a little bit more of the why of the buy when we think about the emotional, social, and practical motivations of the consumer. We've all had that moment of weakness when we've run into a store and bought something because it was on sale. Other times, maybe we've overthought a purchase or thought about it just enough if it was something major like a car or a motorcycle, and we comparison shopped for a very long time before being sure that we made the right decision. But would it surprise you to learn that even when we make a so-called impulse buy, there's often a practical motivation behind it, and sometimes even our most rational decisions have a very strong emotional component. This week, we're going to dive a little deeper into those complex motivations behind consumers' decision-making process. So why do we buy? Well, there's a range of different reasons. Sometimes it's purely practical. We need a new product or service. Maybe our laptop has given out and we need a new one. Or we need to buy something entirely new. Let's say we find out about the latest smartwatch, which has both a health tracker and allows us to make phone calls right from our watches. It's a entirely new product, and we've decided that it's actually going to help us in our day-to-day lives. Sometimes there's another reason why we buy, and that's called planned obsolescence. Basically, a lot of big ticket items ranging from dishwashers to washing machines are actually designed to wear out so that we are obliged to buy new versions of them. They're designed to be just good enough to last 5, 10, 15, or 20 years before breaking down. It's actually possible to make a dishwasher that could last 100 years, at least 50. It's possible to make a refrigerator that could last 80 years, but manufacturers choose not to because, for one thing, if they made products that lasted that long, they'd be out of business, but also the products would cost much more. Making something that high quality could drive the cost up so that it is outside the price range of the average consumer. With planned obsolescence, yes, to some extent it is a ploy on the part of manufacturers to stay in business longer, which you can't blame them for, but at the same time it's also a way of making products that are good quality but not absolutely perfect so that they are reachable by a larger number of consumers. One example of planned obsolescence that actually benefits the consumer in some way is the ever growing features that are available in smartphones. If you have a phone that's 3 or 4 years old, it probably doesn't have the memory to run the apps that you want to run, from Snapchat to your latest fitness tracker. That's because products in the technology sector get better and better as engineers work on improving those products. It's not just planned obsolescence, it's actually just the progress of that particular technology, but the effect is very much the same. Once you get to the point where you need to upgrade your product, you're going to get a better product. And at the same time, if when you upgrade your product, you get something that's maybe mid-range or affordable, you know that it's going to get outdated sooner than something that's absolutely the top of the line and has the most memory and the most power, but you can get a pretty decent phone for a pretty good price if you're willing to compromise on not getting the top quality, but something that's still very good. So those are some of the practical reasons why consumers either need to replace products that we already own or acquire entirely new products. But as we all know, there's also a lot of emotional reasons that we want to buy. But I say emotional without saying that there's anything negative about that, because it's not just the impulse buy. In fact, if you look at this list on the slide deck in front of you, you'll see that impulse buy is actually below identity as one of the so-called emotional reasons that consumers make purchases. Our personal identity is often expressed through fashion or other consumer goods, from the furniture in our apartments to the car that we drive to even the food that we eat. All of those are really critical parts of our personal identity, and sure, that is an emotional need, but it's a very high order emotional need, and we'll talk a little bit about that in the future slides. Group membership, again, it's another emotional need. If you're a member of a particular subculture within society, it's very important to identify your relationship with a larger group of people through some of the consumer goods that you own. Maybe you have a friend who's a goth and they have to buy that black clothing, that heavy makeup, because that's part of their group membership. Maybe you, on the other hand, are a skater or you're a very trendy person. And that group identity is a very critical part of your personal identity. It's often a little bit lower than our own individual identity, which is why it's lower down on this list, but it's still a very important emotional motivator. And finally, we have self-expression, which is a little bit different from identity as a whole. It means more than just telling the world that you are an up-and-coming business professional or a creative individual. It's really about expressing your unique personal identity. Maybe you normally wear very conservative and quiet clothing, but at the same time, maybe you have very creative nail art, or you color your hair fuchsia. In that way, you're not only expressing your identity as, for instance, a business person or a creative, but at the same time, you're also really asserting who you are as a unique individual. And that, again, is often an emotional motivator for making the purchases that we make. And then finally, there's just the sheer creativity of dressing up or decorating our houses. Whether you're buying ingredients for a new cake that you've never baked before, or whether you're putting together an outfit in a thrift store that's vintage inspired, you're really enjoying the creative process, and making purchases is part of that creative process. It doesn't even have to be about a hobby. It could be about an everyday need like food or clothing, but you still want to live your life as creatively as possible, and that too is an emotional factor in consumer behavior. So another way of putting it, though, if you get really strictly down to the nitty-gritty, is there's often a tension in our society between wants and needs. A lot of the things that factor into the emotional why of the buy, like self-expression, may sometimes feel entirely like a need, and they are, but they may not be as much of a need as food, a roof over your head, or medicine. A lot of times it's difficult to distinguish, though, between something that's purely a want and purely a need. If you look on the left-hand side of the screen, we'll see sunglasses, the latest smartphone, and a car. Maybe those are not as necessary to human life as food and shelter, but if you need that car to get to work, then that goes from a want to a need. Similarly, I don't think any of us could get our schoolwork or our jobs done anymore without our smartphone. But do you really need those trendy sunglasses? Well, actually, you do, because you need to protect your eyesight from the sun. However, the quality of the product is what often moves it from a want to a need, or a need to a want. A basic car that gets you there may be a need, but that Lamborghini, I'm going to bet that that is a want. So when we talk about wants versus needs, and we talk about the practical versus the emotional considerations that go into a consumer's purchase, it's important to understand that both wants and needs and practical and emotional considerations exist on a continuum, and it's often hard to draw the line, and there is no fine line between whether it's absolutely necessary to take care of your emotional well-being through a particular form of creative self-expression, for instance, and whether that is more of a want or something that's a purely emotional decision. Maslow was a researcher who lived in the middle of the 20th century, towards the end of the 20th century, and who posits that there is a hierarchy of basic human needs. At the absolute baseline is our physiological needs for survival of the species and for keeping our own bodies alive. We need to breathe, we need to eat, we need to stay warm, and we need to get some sleep, even though sometimes it's hard to do that. Then on top of that, we need to feel safe. We need to make sure that we have a job and the resources we need to stay alive. We need to make sure that we're around people who are positive and healthy for us to be around. We need to make sure that our family is safe and that our property and health are being secured in the long run. Once all of those basic needs have been secured, Maslow's theory was that only then can we really start to pursue the so-called higher order needs. Right above the need for safety, security, food and sleep, and other basic physiological needs, he said that there were the needs for friendship, family, being in a relationship, and then above that, self-esteem, being confident, earning the respect of others, earning our own respect. And that above that comes the real magic bullet for self-actualization, which is becoming a rational person, letting go of our prejudices, becoming a more moral or creative or spontaneous person. Now, you're probably looking at this pyramid with a little bit of skepticism because we all know situations where we've foregone or gone without very basic needs on the bottom of the pyramid right here in order to achieve some of these higher order needs. How many times have we changed our diet in order to, for instance, attract people by having a healthier look and outlook on life, or to improve our self-confidence by maybe cutting out gluten or eating more protein? So sometimes maybe we haven't eaten as much as we want because those healthy foods weren't available, but we knew that we were making those sacrifices in order to, for instance, become healthier, which is supposedly a less urgent need than getting food. But on the other hand, if French fries are the only food around there, then you're sacrificing your health and you'd rather just go without them. Similarly, sometimes we're not feeling well at all. Maybe we haven't had enough sleep. Maybe if you have asthma, you're not breathing so well. But friendship or the presence of your family or the person that you're in a relationship with cheers you up and you feel better in spite of the fact that maybe it's been a bad night, you didn't sleep because the baby was crying or you're having an asthma attack. So your physiological needs on the most basic level are not being met, but at the same time, you're going after your love and belonging needs, and that seems to make everything right. And finally, there's a lot of people who live, for instance, in particular traditions like religious gurus who sometimes give up food and sleep in order to achieve their highest moral good in life. So it's not like you have to get everything on the bottom of the pyramid every single day in order to be able to pursue your self-esteem, your self-confidence, and becoming a self-actualized human being. Obviously, you want to make sure you're breathing, but who among us has not managed to exude self-confidence in spite of a sleepless night? So when we look at Maslow's hierarchy of needs, there's a couple of things we want to take away from this. One, it's not all just about physical survival when we talk about needs at all. Bear in mind, Maslow is saying that boosting our self-esteem, our accomplishment, and our achievement are actual needs, maybe not as urgent as being able to breathe, but they are real, genuine needs. So if you, for instance, go searching for a better laptop so that you can do video editing because it's your dream to be a documentary filmmaker, you're really pursuing confidence and achievement, but at the same time, that is a real need. Just because it's emotional doesn't mean it's not legitimate. So that's one of the things that I want you to think about when you think about the distinction between needs versus wants, is that just because something is an emotional need doesn't mean that it's not legitimate. Now, does that mean that every time I'm having a bad day, I'm going to run into the latest fast fashion place and buy myself 3 new sweaters? No. But it does mean that your need for creativity, for belonging to your social group, or standing out from your social group and showing that you're an individual, regardless of how much money you spend or if you don't spend any money at all, those emotional needs are completely legitimate. And the scientific research validates that. So when you think about a consumer's needs versus wants, bear in mind that those emotional needs are fully legitimate needs, and they often edge into wants if people want things that are not necessarily absolutely necessary, but that doesn't mean that you're not fulfilling an important role in the consumer's life if you provide those so-called wants and not their basic needs like oatmeal or gas for their car. So Consumers often experience a different conflict, not needs versus wants, but the conflict between different needs, stability versus variety. Think about the last time you went into the supermarket or went to the convenience store to grab a snack. Stability is grabbing the same snack you always get. Maybe it's boring, but you know that you're always going to get something that you enjoy, that's nutritious, and that's going to give you the energy to get through the day. But we all want a little variety in our lives. Marketers and product designers have to solve this conflict by creating products that meet both needs at once. You want products, for instance, that are varied yet stable. For instance, your favorite TV series. It's stable in the sense that the same characters are there from day to day, unless you're a Game of Thrones fan, in which case you never know. But there's variety in the sense that the plot is always changing. There's also other conflicting needs, and if you create a product that solves those conflicts between different kinds of needs, you've got a great product that is sure to reach at least one critical targeted audience of yours. Luxurious yet affordable, for instance. All of us want a little luxury in our lives, but not all of us can afford things that a billionaire can afford. Many beauty brands capitalize on our need for high quality products at an affordable price by giving people a luxury image, a good quality material, but at a reasonable drugstore brand price. So if you can create something like that for the consumer, you're filling a legitimate niche. People also want their clothing to be stylish yet comfortable. But it's not just clothing. We want our furniture to be stylish yet comfortable. We want our vehicles, our transportation to be stylish yet comfortable. So think of athleisure wear. You can create all kinds of really nice looking yoga pants and hoodies, and they're comfortable, yet people look good in them. That again solves a need the consumer has of two conflicting desires, whether it's stability versus variety, luxury versus affordability, style versus comfort. If you can find the middle road between them, you're creating a great product for the consumer. Think about in your life some of the other conflicts between different needs. Maybe you're looking for something that's nutritious yet delicious in a snack. Maybe you're looking for a dinner that's quick to prepare yet will impress your guest. Throughout our days, we often have conflicting needs, and the real magic of creating products for the consumer is that you find a way to solve both needs at once by creating just the right product. So oftentimes when people go into stores, they're purchasing goods bought on the basis of the emotional payoff that's immediate. We talked a little bit about belonging to a particular peer group and expressing yourself, but there's a couple of other needs as well. One might be nostalgia. Everywhere we go now, we're seeing 90s clothing, 80s clothing. That's nostalgia. It's a longing for simpler days, whether it's the simpler days of our childhood or our high school years, or maybe even times that we don't remember but have romanticized, like the 1960s. It's before many of us were born, but they often get romanticized as a more glamorous time. And so you can even have nostalgia for a time period that you personally didn't experience. Tied to nostalgia and also tied to belonging and self-expression is the idea of status. In other words, expressing that you are a high status individual. It doesn't have to mean that you want to look like you're wealthy. Status comes in different forms. You might want to show that you are a particularly creative person or a particularly athletic person. You can often show that with the kinds of goods you wear, carry with you, or show off throughout the day. All of these are emotional motives, but they also can be, in my opinion, somewhat rational, because you are sometimes making a first impression, and you want to craft that first impression to show professionalism, belonging, and adherence to social norms within the group of people that you want to impress. It doesn't mean that you're not being yourself, but it means that you're trying to craft that best version of yourself in a way that puts your best foot forwards. So there's a very fine line and a lot of overlap between the rational and the emotional motive. Finally, when we think about the emotional and the rational basis, the needs versus wants, the Practical versus the emotional motivations. We've seen that there's often a mix of the two motives in every single consumer purchase. Sometimes, though, we talk about creating demand. In other words, playing on people's emotions in order to convince them that they need something that they don't really need. You see that a lot in advertising, and especially if you look back at historical advertising from the early days of the 20th century, late 19th century, you can see that it was often blatant. New consumer grooming products were often introduced to the market by telling people that if they didn't use a particular deodorant or soap, they would be scaring people away, wouldn't be successful romantically, wouldn't be able to get a job, wouldn't have any friends. It was really negative advertising. You don't see that as much now, but you often do see that, especially in the fashion industry, sometimes people will see advertising as projecting a negative body image for young people. So is it ethical to convince people that they need something that they don't really need? In other words, is it ethical to convince people that if they don't wear a particular perfume, they don't have a particular style of shoes, that their life is just not going to be as good? But on the other hand, creating demand sometimes is not about convincing people emotionally to feel insecure about themselves to the point where they buy something that they don't really need. Sometimes you really do have a revolutionary product and consumers are unaware how much better their lives are going to be with it. Think about the smartphone, for instance. Smartphones didn't require a lot of advertising in the beginning, but they did require a fair amount of outreach and marketing to show people how beneficial the product was in terms of your productivity and the entertainment value of the product. A lot of times people were either reluctant to go to the expense at the beginning of spending on a smartphone, or they were concerned that they wouldn't learn how to use one. And so smartphone manufacturers had to work to overcome that and quote unquote create demand by convincing people that they did need smartphones. But you know what? They were right, because most of us can't imagine being without our phones today. There are often much needed goods in society from which there is no demand. Hundreds of years ago, what we now think of as modern medicine had no demand because people simply didn't know that it existed. They didn't know that you could get a shot that would prevent you from catching bacteria or viruses. They didn't know that you could eat better, more nutritious food and stay healthy. Even basic things like keeping your environment clean were simply unknown, and hundreds of people got sick unnecessarily because they didn't know about these modern medical practices. It took a lot of public education to get people to understand the benefits of going to the doctor, taking medicine, keeping their environment clean, because it was just completely unknown, and it has saved countless lives. That's an extreme example, but when you think about other products going all the way back to the smartphone, there's always that thing that you wish you had known about sooner or wish had been invented sooner that really truly has changed your life. For instance, I personally, your professor, Christina Inge, used to wear sky-high heels. It took friends telling me about some of the comfortable shoes that they were wearing that I decided I was going to give them a try. And although I still like my 4 and 5-inch heels from time to time, I'm very grateful to the friends who told me about the cork sole wedges that they were wearing. They created demand in me via word of mouth to try these new products, but they truly improved my quality of life, especially on icy sidewalks. So what is the morality of creating demand? If you really believe in your product, whether it is a product that you yourself manufactured or are the marketer for, or whether it's just a product that you use and you want to tell other consumers about it, if you really think it improves people's quality of life, in that case, if you're creating demand for it, you really are just benefiting people. But what about companies that are a little bit more cynical about creating demand and really do prey on people's emotions by telling them that they won't be attractive, won't be healthy, happy, or popular without particular superficial products like a particular type of makeup, style of clothing, or grooming product? Is it ethical to convince them that they need that kind of thing? Like a lot of the things we're talking about this week, there's no clear answer and there are not enough clear distinctions. It's up to us as individuals to decide when is it ethical to create demand because we really believe in our product enough. It's also up to us to decide as we're walking past that window and we see that sweater that really says us, expresses our personality absolutely perfectly. Is the impulse to run in and buy it a need or is it a want? I hope that's food for thought. Take care and talk to you soon.